Well, hello, folks. This is Jeffrey Darty with our first official edition of WWJD, the WWJD show. Doesn't mean what you think it means. It means wisdom with Jeff Darty. And we're going to try to talk about wisdom. I am Jeffrey Darty, so here we go with a little WWJD. I wanted to talk today about the King James Version of the Bible. More specifically, was the King James Version an inside job? Now, people are asking, what's an inside job? Let's talk a little bit first about what the King James Version is. Now, this is a King James Version Bible. You might say that this is a king-size King James Version. This is the one I used to use, well, for about 10 of my years of preaching. I think I used this one. And, I mean, it's very, very much annotated. It's very, very much used. You know, I spent over 20 years as a Pentecostal minister, and I probably used this one, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 years. But at any rate, this is a king-size King James Version. And to most people, the King James Version is not only a Bible, it's the Bible. Most Christians look at the King James Version as the Bible. And most Christians, at least Protestant Christians, I should say, they look at the Bible as the inerrant, written Word of God revealed to man. That means they believe every single line, every single word, every single bit of it, and mostly that which is contained within this King James Version. And for many, many years, I believed the same thing. And when you think about it, that's quite a statement, because what you're saying is that your eternal destiny, your spiritual destiny, what you believe is written down and wrapped up in the words of this book. Of course, it's not really one book. It's 66 different books written over a period of about 4,000 years by, I want to say 40 authors. That may be a little bit off, but a bunch of people. And if it holds the key and the Word of God in the view of most people, then it becomes a very, very important document, because if your eternal destiny rides within the pages, or what's written within the pages of this book, it becomes very, very important where this book came from. Now, I asked the question, is the King James Version an inside job? And what is an inside job? Well, an inside job is typically something that's thought of as a false flag that goes hand in hand with that type of thinking. An inside job would be something that was planned, carried out, and sold by a authoritarian type of an organization, typically by a government, maybe by a huge religious organization. But an inside job is something that is planned, carried out, and then sold on a global basis to people by a governmental entity. Things like, many believe the attack on Pearl Harbor, that the government had foreknowledge that that attack was going to come. They let it happen and used it as a excuse, as a motivation to be able to enter into World War II, so a lot of people can make a lot of money. It's beyond question that the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which supposedly was an attack by the Vietnamese on American assets, and that's what was used as justification to go into the Vietnam War, never happened. We know that now by a fact, and that's not a conspiracy theory, that's just the truth. And you have things like the 9/11 tragedy. Tons of questions, tons of things that make people say, wait a second. And there's a lot of great information that allows people to believe, honest people that aren't nuts, that 9/11 was an inside job. You come down to things even more modern, like the Sandy Hook situation, and look at the lack of evidence and the questions that are there. And these things are what we're talking about with inside jobs. So Jeff, how in the world could the King James Bible be an inside job? Well, it was written in 1604 to 1611. So I've heard people say, if the King James Bible is good enough for Jesus, it's good enough for me. Well, folks, Jesus left this earth in about 32 to 35-ish AD. So he was about 1600 plus years early for the King James Version. So the King James Version was not good enough for Jesus. And it's interesting to note that the King James Version of the Bible was printed by the King's printer. It had English church authority approval, and it was written to update the Puritan theology, and for the biggest reason, all of the history says that the reason the King James Version was written was to establish the belief in a clergy class. That means there's these august, almighty, super holy men that are the priests, that are the pastors, that are the leaders. And there's the rest of us we call the laity. We just do what they say. We just do what they tell us. We just do what they want us to do. So it was really written to enhance the Puritan theology. And Puritan means no fun. I'm telling you the truth. That's what the word means, no fun. So it was written to enhance the Puritan theology and to establish the truthfulness of a clergy class per the king. These things give me a little bit of pause. It's written by the King's printer. It was given English church authority approval. And it was admittedly written to enhance the Puritan theology, which means no fun. Who wants that, right? And it was also written to enhance the power of the clergy class, to establish the clergy class. You see, this was not too long after Martin Luther nailed his thesis up on the doors of Wittenberg Chapel. I've actually been to that chapel. It's quite interesting. This was also during the time where King James was trying to get away from the Catholic Church a little bit because he wanted to get a divorce and they wouldn't let him do it. So King James wanted to strengthen Protestantism, and that's another reason for this King James Version Bible that would be different than the Latin Vulgate, of course, and the scriptures that the Catholic Church was using. So King James says, yeah, I want to get away from the Catholic Church so I can get a divorce, but I want to establish the divine right of kings, and I want to establish the fact that the clergy is a divine institution. And why would they want to establish these things? Of course, if you're the king, you want to establish the fact that the king is divinely appointed because, hey, that puts you in charge. But why do you want to establish a clergy class? Sounds like you want to control people to me. Because if people could be their own spiritual leaders, their own spiritual guides, wow, hard to control. But if we can establish a clergy class, we can keep these people in control. The 47 scholars that translated the King James Version were all members of the Church of England. Every single one of them was a member of one church. That's the Episcopal Church. Now, if you were going to translate a Bible in this day and age, in the United States of America, where there's got to be 300 or 400 denominations, what would you think about if the Episcopal Church came out and said, hey, look, we've translated the Bible. Don't worry. Trust us. I don't know. And there was a lot of first-hand manuscripts that were available to the King James Translation Committee. They could have looked at original first-hand manuscripts of these books of the Bible. And they chose not to look at a single one. They had a multitude of original manuscripts at their control. They refused to look at a single one. Written by the King's printer, by the authority of the Church of England, to establish the clergy class by 47 scholars from one church who refused to look at even one of the original manuscripts to produce a translation that was commissioned by a king who wanted to disrupt the Catholic Church, enhance his own authority, put forward the rock solid idea of a clergy class and help him get a divorce along the way. Was the King James Version an inside job? You have to ask that question for yourself. Does it sound like a document that you want to base your eternal destiny on? I don't know. That's a question that only you can answer. I'll be back again tomorrow with another episode of WWJD. You can order my new book, which goes into this, which it's right next door, one of the two ways. I can't remember which with the video. And underneath, if you want to follow me on Twitter or on Facebook, or if you want to send me a question or a comment that I will respond to live in these videos. Until tomorrow, I'm Jeffrey Daugherty, wishing you peace and light.